Learning machines beyond Metropolis. This is the subject of our panel discussion, which we will have now. It's panel number 6 on the ensemble of panels of the Luxembourg Internet Days 2020. And with me on that panel, I have Emilia Tantar from Black Swan. Hello, Emilia.
Hi there. Nice to be here.
I have Monique Bachner from Bachner Legal. Hello, Monique.
Hi, good morning, or good afternoon.
Okay, I have my friend Mr. Chris Fuller, from F5. Hello, Chris.
Good day.
And Nicolas Dupuis from Nokia Bell Labs. Now,
yes,
a quick
hello.
word of explanation for those who are joining us now on the spot. We have decided, as the others know already, we have decided to place the Luxembourg Internet Days 2020 within the context of a completely invented crisis scenario. And that crisis scenario helps us to a certain extent define a number of questions, get a few lines of thought out to you in the public, but also to our panel members. So basically what you have seen in the last half hour drop into your mailbox is what we have imagined as a number of statements or thoughts and questions in relation to the panel which is going to take place right now. The way we did that, or the reason we did that, is because we want to have a certain level of spontaneity among our panel members and get their feeling out of the box and their thinking out of the box on AI and machine learning and on a number of issues which we have addressed in our crisis scenario, which again is fully invented, so any resemblance with real people or real events is completely, well, not maybe that hypothetical at all after all. I would like to kick off this panel because there are a lot of misconceptions out there in the market as to what artificial intelligence really is and what machine learning really is. I'm not very fond of spending a lot of time in definitions or things like that. So could just each one of you give me a very, very short, very concise line of thinking what your understanding or what your definition of artificial intelligence would be. Let's start with Emilia.
Hi. So I will quote the definition which was given by the high-level expert group of the European Commission and which is in line with the Alan Turing Institute. Artificial intelligence is a system which reacts to the environment and based on the collected data, sensed data, being, let's say, motion data or any other type of data, builds up knowledge and provides an output for decision makers.
Okay,
as
Monique?
from my own perspective,
sorry, go on.
As from my own perspective, we do not really have artificial intelligence, but we have a panoply of algorithms, this is shared also by the European Commission definition, which enter under the umbrella of this artificial intelligence paradigm. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Monique?
Yeah, so as not to use the same definition, it's a form of automation that can build knowledge and that can then learn and build on that knowledge in order to be able to use data sets and information in new and innovative ways.
Okay, Chris?
I think at the risk of repeating and standing on the shoulders of giants with Monique and Emilia, I'd echo the same. It's a way of taking large data sets and training upon those data sets to produce an ever-increasing accurate outcome, often combined with some form of decision engine that can then act on those outputs.
Nicolas?
Yes, I would even, before talking about artificial intelligence, maybe quote what is intelligence. And when you look at intelligence on Wikipedia, for example, it's the capacity to extract information. Yes, machine can do that. To derive patterns or model, yes. But the ability also to extrapolate. And on that sense, maybe it's quite difficult still today for the machine to do that. So yes, there is a part of an AI we also confuse with machine learning. There is a part of learning. I'm okay with that. But is it really intelligent because you learn? And ability to extrapolate, that is another question.
Okay, thank you. I would just like to, if any one of you wants to react on what is said by somebody else, just feel free to do so. I mean, it's your panel, it's not my panel, to be very clear on that one. I would just like to hook on to what Chris said. You were speaking about extractions from data, etc., etc. So basically, is artificial intelligence the learning or a kind of more or less automated extrapolation on big data?
I think that's certainly in the context within the area of machine learning that I operate. Yes, often we're taking both structured and unstructured forms of data, the inputs from requests that we see entering our networks and security systems, and sometimes inferring from unstructured data, blog posts and social media, in order to train models to derive outcomes and again, often take actions within the context of the cybersecurity system. So I think, especially in the context in which I discuss with my customers, taking all these forms of data, structuring them is a really big component of what we eventually build with machine learning.
It's very interesting because hearing you say about or speak about structuring of data, that's basically the fundamental definition of a computer, isn't it? Because it structures data.
Certainly, traditionally, yes. And if I look at the way that, historically the systems work in the past, we were very used to working within databases that have everything in predefined and labeled columns. Whereas that's not always the case now. Again, we're taking lots of different inputs. We're trying to make inferences and classify that data, sometimes outside of that structured system. So again, with cybersecurity contexts, we don't necessarily just want to look at that structured data. Maybe we're trying to infer things about the nature of attacks that might be hitting an organization because of the inference and the sentiment that we can derive from social media.
Okay. I would still like to add two other concepts into the discussion. One is consciousness, the other one is intuition. Are we moving into that direction of consciousness of systems, of machines, one moment or another? Or is that basically Faustian to speak or think about that? And then second is, how about intuition? Which are basically what makes us humans individual vis-a-vis learning or understanding machines, or at least at this moment.
Maybe I could answer that on the consciousness. When we speak in the artificial intelligence area about artificial consciousness, we are referring to the capacity of the systems of moving, I would say, to emulate the interoperation which exists in the human brain. But then the human intelligence, and Nicolas well reflected that it means having also mental states and having, as you mentioned, having the capacity of having intuition, which is the environment. So consciousness is one part of the interoperability of the neural network, which affects physically human brain. But then we have other parts. So if we take only consciousness, and the machine will be able in the future to emulate that, that will solve only a simplified version of the human intelligence, because we leave aside the mental states and we leave aside what you call intuition.
Nicolas, Monique was referring to
yes.
you. Sorry, Emilia was referring to you.
Yeah, and I would even add, and maybe it's a bridge between the precedent topics about big data and intuition. These machines, they are trained using a lot of data. So it requires for training a lot of data. But to have an intuition, actually, us human having an intuition of something, you have a few signals that give you an intuition. And I'm not sure today the machine with very few signals can really derive hidden rules or really second meaning of the aspect. And we are not yet there at all. And to be there, I would think that the way even the model are built today would need to even change, because it's, I think, for me difficult with the existing neural network to start to give them intuition. I don't see where with the existing techniques we could really start feeding them with that.
Chris, you were acknowledging, as I saw on the screen.
Absolutely, yeah. Intuition is certainly for me personally such a hard thing to define in terms of the way that we act, and there's so much subconsciously that happens. If I take an example of a farmer who's grown up in that environment, who knows variables and effectively collects big data that respond to the weather, the flock. They know when to organize that flock to shelter them from a particularly bad storm, or when to leave them grazing to support those future outcomes. As Nicolas says, I just don't see a current path to providing that level of intuition from the mechanisms that we have presently.
Yes, and then comes, adding to that comes the fact that something which always puzzled me and made me kind of have eruptive reactions during my studies is each time my teacher said, in an econometric model, let's assume that the economic subject acts rationally in every period. Now, we know that humans are the experts in irrational or upfront irrational, or what we would consider irrational behavior. Now that obviously too, if your world happens between 0 and 1, that obviously too is something which is extremely difficult to modelize.
Isn't it more like a predictive behavior than an irrational behavior? We fear what we do not understand, and we consider irrational some behaviors that we didn't see in the past. And I think you highlighted one of the limitations of the current panoply of the algorithms in artificial intelligence. We tend to believe that the history will repeat itself. And what we had as knowledge, for example, what we had as understanding of an anomaly, of an attack in the past, will repeat itself. What we know as a fact is that attacks, they tend to pass because they follow unknown patterns. So this is, again, a difficulty in one of the fields of anomaly detection that Chris is full aware of, and he mentioned, and he can provide more details. We cannot reproduce this kind of behavior, so we don't know what we are searching for in the data. What we are currently doing, we are exhaustively searching in big data. But if the data that is fed has no value, so it was not labeled by experts in the field, is garbage in, garbage out. And again, when we are searching for rare events as attacks, we are searching for what we know, and we can't stimulate the unknown. And that's one of the limitations.
Yeah, and that join.
One thing I'd add there is that rational is, sorry.
No, go on, Monique. Go on, and Nicolas afterwards.
Yeah, well, rational is also context-driven. So what is rational in one circumstance might be irrational in another. And here we're limited by the programming. And so even if it does what it's expected to do in a certain context, that might be a very irrational outcome.
Nicolas?
No, I wanted to complement what Emilia was saying, and it's a bit what I wanted to say with the capacity to extrapolate. So today, machine learning, it's based on training. You need to have seen the situation in the past to be able to detect it. Okay, smartly, you are very accurate, but you can redetect that if that happens in the future. But a new theory, a totally new event that has never been seen before, the machine today are kind of not trained to be able to detect that. And it's what I think differ from humans, great theoreticians or scientists, is with few rules they can derive totally new phenomenon or explain new phenomenon, while the machine has a lot of difficulties these days to do that.
think I want to touch on Monique's point about rationality. I think that's really interesting, especially in the current environment where rational behavior is probably staying at home, socially distancing, wearing a mask. For many people, for other people, it might be supporting the economy, continuing to make things work. So how do you create a system without that level of bias using the data that you have? I think the definition of rationality is probably too broad for us to explore here, but it's a great point that Monique made around how do you encode that into a system. And equally to the point that Emilia and Nicolas were making around anomaly detection, certainly for the current environment, what we're often doing is trying to minimize the amount of events that a human is looking at. So we can use machine learning to take the thousands of security events that might be raised per day down to a few hundred where a human can then act on them. But we're not yet really at a point where as Nicolas says, the machine learning algorithms can act on entirely new events. And in a world where I think Marie was touching upon this at the end of her last presentation, where we're starting to see almost adversarial use of attacks against machine learning, we also need to be aware that the number of new events that might be occurring when you can start to use machine learning and fuzzing together, it may start to exponentially increase.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, maybe one remark getting from...
Yeah, go on.
Getting from that, we were speaking about the rational, but we have a great expert here with Monique on AI ethics. And there is also, I would advise also the audience to follow, there is UpHuman at the National Theatre. It's also, you have a small teaser that you have online, which speaks about AI ethics. What are ethics? They are, and Monique could provide more insights on that. They are the norms which are transposed technically by people, technical like us, on standardization. And we have standards, but then ethics evolve. So we need to reevaluate according to the situation how these ethics are affecting society. And I will let Monique follow on that. But this is the clear question mark, and I would say open question, which is current on the table for all AI applications. And this is the trustworthiness and the responsible character of the AI. We need to build in Europe trustworthy AI. How do we do that? How do we cope with ethics? And I will let Monique give more insights on that.
Absolutely. That was going to be my next question, Emilia. So it's perfect timing. Thank you, Monique. The ball is in your camp.
Okay, yeah. I mean, AI ethics, I obviously I've spent a lot of time on it, so I think it is fundamental. And there's an evolution of quite a few different efforts on the global scale. And obviously in the context of Luxembourg, some of the most important ones will be the ones from the EU, the ethics guidelines for trustworthy artificial intelligence, but also, on a broader scale, OECD, IEEE, there's many of them. But if we look at the case study that we were given, the problem is, how do you guarantee that everybody adheres to them? How do you get people to pay attention? So obviously you end up with an unlevel playing field if you've got some who are adhering to best practices. This is not, obviously only restricted in this domain, but there's a perhaps much larger impact here of people not adhering, just like there are with things like weapons of mass destruction. And so we need to try, on the basis of, human rights and other sort of international mechanisms to have people understand and to agree that ethics is important, and that just like certain other technologies, weapons of mass destruction, but also, newer things like CRISPR and genetic modification, that there are so many unintended consequences that can come out of this technology because of the potential power and the speed with which it can act, that we really need to focus on this. And we're getting to a discussion in Europe, at least, about codes of ethics are not enough. The law does need to be strengthened and to require certain outcomes, because this should not be an option.
Okay, so do I understand you correctly that basically afterwards, or after a certain period of eventually trial and error on the regulatory side and on the side of the definition of common values, which is a very, very difficult subject and a very complex thematic, is it going to be basically the regulatory environment which will be what the French call le garde-fou, so the fool's gate, with regard to what AI will be able of doing in the medium to long run? And is the regulatory environment going to be the unique selling proposition of AI, because we need people to adhere to it? We need those who basically do artificial intelligence already today, probably largely without knowing, because they are in contact with systems, they are in contact with technologies which contain artificial intelligence and machine learning already today. Is that the way to go?
No, it's not that, it's going to restrict the use of it. It's going to control the application of it. Just like we have rules like GDPR that affect how we use data or certain subsets of data, these types of rules will affect how we can use, maybe use is not the right word, what data we need to share about how we are controlling and governing our AI models. So, we're in Luxembourg. If we are going to have a fund which is doing algorithmic trading, what level of transparency will be required to launch that algorithm? If you're having more complex AI deployed, again, what level of transparency, auditing of the code, back testing to make sure it's working as it says it on the box, and so on. A little bit like we have, also with, toys or things coming from different parts of the world. We have rules for, you can't have paint with lead and poisons in them for the kids to eat, and so on. So here it's about the packaging in a way. How are you deploying it and making sure that it's done safely? But it's not saying in the end what toys you can or can't have.
True, we are getting close to what we have without comparing to what is not comparable, but we are getting close, if I'm hearing you correctly, to what we have today in terms of online casinos, etc., where the regulation also requests you to deposit the algorithms, which need to be transparent, testable, etc.
I think the European Parliament has since 2018, but this is again, it's a little bit out of my reach. It already said in 2018 that we need regulatory sandboxes. In September, 23 September, if I remember well, this year, there was a commission, high-level commission, AIDA, which was named by the European Parliament to investigate what will be the framework, the legal framework, which will apply for artificial intelligence. Their mandate is for 1 year, so we should expect in 2021 to have a horizontal legal framework. What it was already communicated by the European institutions concerned that for high-risk applications, we'll have certification and compliance, which are compulsory, and Monique will be able to provide more details on that. And for applications which are considered non-high risk, we'll have voluntary labeling and self-assessment. As part of the focus group, we have a focus group with the European Institution Joint Research Center, and I'm part of this SME focus group on artificial intelligence, so we provide feedback on the upcoming measures. We know that it will be based on standardization, which comes technical, but the legislation, the horizontal legal framework, will cover only high-risk applications. But then what is considered high risk is all that affects human well-being. So Monique can explain more the others, but this will be transposed by the existing laws, and I do not have the details. But we know that in 2021, an important step will be made, and we'll have legislation, and we'll have regulators working on that. The instruments, they are not there yet. Some of them, either the standards, they are not, or we don't have published standards in AI. We are working since 2017-18, but we don't have them published. So they can be cited by the law, but they are not in their last form, in the final form. So this is where we are, and Monique can provide details how this affects the landscape.
Before listening
I think Emilia
Monique,
actually summarized it really well. Yeah, but I would say again, if you compare it to something like GDPR, you see that distinction between sensitive personal data and data generally. And here a little bit that same sort of idea is coming into these legislation around AI. You've got the high-risk activities, which will be subject to much greater controls, but not every activity.
My question to both Nicolas and to Chris would be, what would then, facing the current terrain which is moving on the regulatory side, what would be your wish list to appear on or in such a regulation?
I'll go first.
Yeah.
And I think this is very important, and there's a lot of benefit that we have from regulations like GDPR in this environment that I'm often grateful for when I'm working with my colleagues in the United States. I know that when I'm conversing with my customers, we're talking about the application of machine learning. Often there's a trade-off between the accuracy of the result and the observability of the process itself. And depending on the customer, we might choose to go for a much more observable model because we know how the outcome is derived. And that might be important when you're assessing a transaction for fraud, and that score potentially needs to be explained. But often it's nice to have that capability to be a bit more accurate in your prediction. So I guess I'd love to hear from Monique how that would potentially be balanced. But how do we incorporate the ability to go beyond purely observable models and still have all the benefits from machine learning would be my, I guess, wish list and question together.
Nicolas.
In terms of regulation, but I hear that also from Monique, it's important to make a strong distinction between human sensitive data and non-human sensitive data. Example, I work for Nokia Bell Labs. We manipulate powers, bits, margins, errors. It's pure technical data for communication. AI heavily assists now any communication system, fixed, mobile, in having a good services. But for that, we don't use at all any user-sensitive or private data. It's purely at the technology level, at the power level or whatever. And on that, too much regulation might be finally limiting. So my wish list would be to have clear distinction, but I think it's on the good way, between data that are private or sensitive and need special attention and maybe not to be shared or even not to be created. It's another debate, but that's one aspect. And data that are non-sensitive, and finally that helps us in our everyday life, let's say. And everyday life is, if we are now able to talk, it's because we have an internet connection. That internet connection is optimized, and if it's optimized, you have algorithm, and now these algorithms are AI based. So for that, it's a plus for us. We are all at home, we work, it's a plus. But then wish list, let's separate clearly what is sensitive data and non-sensitive data, and let's have a clear definition on that maybe.
Monique.
Yeah, so I think clarity is always the holy grail, but we may or may not get there. Some types of data or some types of, are easier to classify than others. And obviously the working groups are going through this, and there's a lot of debates. And hopefully, across the world, we'll also try to get to some sort of consensus on what these definitions are, and that people will follow the lead of the EU in these matters. But at the moment, the discussions continue. And I think that the first draft that comes out will certainly not be the last iteration, and it will have to be adapted over time. But we hope that it does end up as a sensible, but still a strong enough start, so that it strikes that balance between not constraining industry and what people can do, but still does actually offer enough safeguards.
Okay, thank you for that one. Another question from my side is there's a lot of nonsense out in the market as to what artificial intelligence will do to our day-to-day lives, how it will impact us, whether it's going to take away jobs, yes or no. Likewise with machine learning, etc., etc. What needs to be done? How are we going to be able to get all those phony ideas out of the brains of people? How can we make artificial intelligence and machine learning sellable to the outside? I mean, the regulatory environment is one thing. I'm following you on that one. But how are we going to do on the communication side?
Maybe I can answer that because I've been confronted to that. So we talk with big service provider, big operator in the telecom industry. When we arrive with AI algorithm that will, for example, diagnose or troubleshoot an internet connection, you can have fears from the field forces, from the technician, to lose their job because this new AI will take and will do all the job. So that's usually the first reaction. But after some time, they realize that AI cannot do neither everything. At the end, if it's broken, somebody has to go in the street and fix your internet connection. And at the end, people that have this AI in their hands start to be augmented, start to be enhanced, and start to like it. And they become even our supporter. So we face usually at the beginning what you would like to sell AI some fears. And then after a process which is not easy, and that can be long and painful and cost some money, etc. But after a long process, it gets adopted and people see the benefits. And it can be, we can do the parallel, let's say with doctors. Having an AI that replaces a doctor would be very complete and difficult to get in the near future, while doctor can be also enhanced with some tool that, I don't know, diagnose better some skin cancer than themselves with their eyes. But they are not replaced, they are augmented, and then can even do their job better or in a more easier way, let's say. So I think we need to better address the wording. AI will not replace human, it will help human, simplifying their job or enhancing, being more precise in their job.
Chris?
If I would add on Nicolas, AI is like electricity, it's a new technology. So of course we fear what we don't understand. And maybe not everyone will understand, as I don't understand exactly what happens in my electricity system in the house, but I trust it. And the problem that you raised with communication, it's not only AI specific. How there is communication around the crisis, then there is communication in general around different topics. What are the sources of communication, of information we trust? In the old times, we were trusting dictionaries. You don't know what this term means. You go to the dictionary and you have a trusted source because it's made by different experts which put together their opinions. What are the sources of trust? Should we trust Wikipedia? Should we trust the knowledge graph of a search engine, no matter what search engine is that? Because the correlations in this, between terms, between artificial intelligence and fear, let's say, they are put by the engineers which designed the system. But then we trusted in the past academicians and scientists which were from the field to define what a plant is. And now we consider that engineers, they are omniscient. So they can define correlation between any term. And I include myself there because I have a technical background. So I think now we need to build public sources of information, public trusted sources of information. Of course, we have Wikipedia and other initiatives on that field, but do we have this for the economical sectors, for the verticals? Do we have, I would say, knowledge graphs, but do we have trusted sources of useful communication, useful knowledge, useful information, not any data, but data with context that they could navigate to trust what they are doing? So I think now it's not us as technicians or our panel will solve that. It's an open question. What sources of information we trust and what are the public sources of information we can address.
Mm-hmm. Chris, have you been running into that fear factor or being confronted with that fear factor Nicolas was mentioning?
Yeah, I think there's two components, again, coming back to observability. So when you have an output that's often interpreted by an expert, do they know how that output is derived? Because in that concept where you don't have an automatic or a decision engine interpreting the result, instead when you're passing on to a human, there's a likelihood that that human might just disregard it. So there's often trade-offs in the way that we implement these models to make sure that that result is interpretable and much more likely to be accepted by the human. But fundamentally, I think Nicolas is absolutely right in that these tools and technologies right now augment the capabilities of humans. So in the security operations centers that we run, we don't use machine learning to automatically produce an output and start mitigating traffic for our customers. That result is interpreted by an expert in that field who then uses that algorithm, that output, to achieve more scale, to more accurately identify attacks, more accurately identify fraud. And in that context, and particularly those technical fields, I think that, to Nicolas' point, those results are often interpreted and augment that skill set. I'd be interested to see when we start to apply this maybe to wider spaces. We've seen recently the propositions that Uber and Lyft got passed in the United States to make sure that their employees remained independent contractors. We know that Uber and Lyft don't make a lot of profit, and they are betting a lot of money on the fact that self-driving cars will be available. So I think there almost might be a tiering in terms of the acceptance of machine learning between those experts who can use that result to augment their skills, and then people who might be fundamentally replaced by those capabilities.
Yeah. And I think there would be even a third aspect where human has not yet addressed a problem. So we observe that with new technologies. If we talk about 5G, 25,000 parameters to optimize. 5G is not there yet or under deployment, but no one plans from a human's perspective to tune this 25,000 parameter. So let's already build machines that will also adapt these parameters. And again, that will be AI-driven machines, let's say. And in that case, we are not going to replace a human, because that task would be impossible almost for a human to be done correctly. And when you have to do that for any connections, 25,000 people for anybody moving everywhere, it's going to be it's materially, physically impossible to do that by a human. So all to say that there are new areas that has never been or will not be addressed by a human, and in that case AI helps to address these areas without taking any jobs, and in that case you even create some, because your AI system need to be created, maintained, deployed. So the people around that, it's jobs for them, let's say.
Any other reaction on that one? It's very interesting.
I would just add that. Sorry.
Go on.
Yeah, just that this is a cycle that's been going on forever. We had horses, and then cars, and we had typewriters, and then we had word processors, and it was all going to replace everybody. But we just seem to get more and more less and less time, free time, and more things to do each time that we go through these cycles. So yes, things will change, and some of those jobs will change, but I'm doubtful that it will mean mass unemployment. But people have to be ready to reskill. People need to be tech savvy. People need to learn and be curious about all these new technologies as the world changes. Just like now, if you wouldn't be able to use email or internet, you wouldn't even be able to do your banking anymore, or very basic things, because you need to move with the times. But it doesn't mean that that those jobs have disappeared, that they have changed.
True. Let me summarize this part of our discussion with a statement which Yves Lequin made some time ago, speaking about machine learning and exactly this fear factor part of it. He said something in the lines of that humans have a tendency of forgetting how their inventions have improved their life. And he quotes the example of a stone knife. The first stone knife obviously allowed the human to be much more effective than cutting meat with teeth or something like that. A stone knife is way more effective. It didn't replace the human. It didn't replace the hunter. So to a certain extent, we are probably kind of slow on getting out of our cave, and each time just looking at a new invention or a new development like being a future new improvement to our lives, rather than a fundamental change which ultimately is going to replace us. That being said, let me address we have another 2, 3, 4 minutes. Let me pass on the following question to you. Where do you see AI or machine learning go? If you had 5, 6, 7 ideas to put on the table, where do you see it go in a medium-term future? What is medium-term? The next 5 to 10 years? Who starts?
Yeah, there are trends, but it's a bit generic in the domain. But we all agree that machines require by far too much data to be trained. In modern deep learning system, or the one I'm dealing with every day, we need tens of millions of data, well labeled, to train some system correctly. While a child of 3 years old with 5 to 10 examples, he can already learn something and extrapolate that to if you draw 3 cats or 5 cats, 10 cats, he will maybe be able to draw another cat. So you don't need so many examples. So there are trends in the domain that tends to say the future of artificial intelligence, machine learning, the future, but also the necessity in the next year will be to reduce the amount of data necessary to train these machines. So that's one, the amount of data. And then second, the ability to extrapolate, to generalize better. It's a bit pity that you need 100 millions of data to do a very precise task. And when it's something that has not been seen out of this hundreds of millions of samples, you will probably fail. With that amount of data, normally you should be able to also extrapolate to some extent. So I think a second aspect would be to be able to generalize better, or to extrapolate better with less data. But I don't know if it's the future, if it's arriving, or if at the end it's what we need, what we would like to have, but I don't know when it will really arrive.
But what would you, Nicolas, like to have? Let me be very personal with the question. Not the trends, not what is happening at Nokia Bell Labs, but what would you like to see?
on that specific aspect, I think, yes, we have too many tricks to increase our robustness. So robustness, it's not to be accurate on a domain that you know, but when it's something that you don't know, something that you don't really control happens, to be robust to that and not to dramatically fail. So we like to have more robustness in our system, and today we have to involve too many tricks to gain in good robustness. So me personally, as a tech lead, I would prefer to have system that can be more easily be robust, and I think that comes via a better generalization.
Emilia.
I would say I will take the question, I'll split it in two sides. The first side, what we will see for sure AI everywhere. So it will be like electricity. It will be adopted. Some will understand till the details, some not, but this is not the question. And I think we'll pass from an approach on big data, where we understand that data has no value, on an approach which is lean data. I agree with Nicolas. This is a bottleneck now, and we need to change. We can treat data. There are AI on the edge, which is able to treat data lean. Lean meaning we use the data to train our model, but we don't keep it. We just use it, consume it, and drop it. So then we have quantum. We don't discuss about it, but it's coming. And this is when it will come. I don't have the magic ball, so I can't tell you that. Then another paradigm which changes, and this is something that we all learn how to learn during our education. Now we need to continuously learn, because our skills, they need to adapt to the ever-growing technological aspects, meaning that the way that we interact with the digital environment changes. The digital environment provides us more and more data. It's becoming even difficult to buy a t-shirt because you have a large panoply of colors, and after free in decision-making, I did my PhD on that, we have difficulties in choosing. So this is a real challenge. So education, continuous learning, MIT and others in Singapore, they already provide long life education, and this is what we need, because we'll need some support in adapting ourselves to the environment, the ever-changing environment. What I would like to see, this is the second part of the question, because you asked us, so I'll provide an answer to that. I think what I would like to see in the Sustainable Development Goals, I would like to see a shift between growth to resilience, because AI, we saw it in a crisis, it will not do any wonders. It will provide us more information, but it will not solve the problem for us. So, of course, it will support us. What we need is that the entire supply chains and all the society is more resilient. So I would change, and I would propose that we change in the Sustainable Development Goals, growth to resilience. It's better to be able to keep what we have, and AI can support us, than aim for growth, but then compromise, because we always compromise when we have more than two objectives. So I think that's all the reflections I could share from this, my side. Thank you.
Okay, let me just throw a remark in here, and don't take this as a sexist statement. I would never do that. But I would trust that if I were to ask Nicolas and Chris on buying a T-shirt, they are guys. It's probably a 2-minute job. The size matters, the color doesn't. End of story. So, getting to Monique with the same question before I'm getting. Yeah, go on.
If I would have a remark on that, that's easy also from my side, because as you see, I have black or dark blue, so that's easy. But then again, I was generalizing to the context, and when you are going to the store, you are faced with a panoply of colors, being man or woman. Thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. Monique, up to you.
Yeah, so
where do you see us going?
So as not to kind of go on the same type of something, I see AI everywhere, and really a need for education. We're seeing a lot of, emphasis on this in the Nordics, and I hope that will be, pushed out equally in Luxembourg and generally, because, education is key here to understanding and questioning and then using. so much focus has been on the negatives, the loss of jobs, obviously it makes good movies to have killer robots that go rogue and so on. And maybe a little bit less interesting to show how, new technologies have actually, helped achieve some of the sustainable development goals or some ESG metrics, or have actually helped address biases rather than just enhance them. So I do hope that there will be a lot more focus on the positives as well as the negatives, because I do think that will help the public to understand, those positive aspects and how this is making life better. It's not just, ruining your jobs and so on.
It's very important, the question of the building of the skill sets. That's a problem which is common to the countries all over Europe. We have that in Luxembourg. It's dramatic. Let me not overstate it, but it's dramatic. The technical skill sets and the building of the technical skill sets and the technical needs. But I fully agree with you. That's one of the most important challenges which we are facing. Chris, you get the last word. What are your trends, or where do you see things going? And let us know.
I'm going to pull my earlier trick and just take what my esteemed colleagues have said on the panel and rephrase it slightly. But I think, as Emilia said, and I live in a Victorian house in London, so sometimes it's incorrect to presuppose the availability of electricity, but machine learning eventually will be everywhere. And as we come on to the education topic that Monique mentioned, hopefully we can get to a point where the applicability, the use of machine learning is not something that is feared, but it is instead enhancing our lives. Now, I think that is a greater challenge than we realize. Emilia earlier talked about trusting in data sources, and over the last really 4 or so years in what appears to be a post-truth world, I'm not sure how we go about that process. But I think there's a lot of potential with this machine learning and AI that we are yet to realize. And I hope that through our continued efforts, we're able to emphasize the positives of that rather than dwell on the negatives, as Monique aptly puts.
Well, if in Victorian houses electricity is an issue, is the noise which we are hearing in the background, is that your wife or your kids riding a bike with a dynamo on AC to produce the power for our connection?
Quite possibly. Saves a little bit of money on the electricity bill, that's for sure.
Exactly. That's the money to invest in the AI of the future. Ladies, gentlemen, thank you very much for having given us your time, your insights, your very valuable thoughts. Hopefully I will see you in Luxembourg for 2021, the forthcoming edition of the Luxembourg Internet Days. Save your dates. I have to look on my piece of paper. 16th, 17th and 18th of November.